Hello everyone, welcome to Effects PhD Class 7 for the Craft of Grading 2. I'm your instructor, Mike Matusik. By popular request, I'd like to spend the next couple of classes talking about skin tones. And when it comes down to it, the skin tones are probably the most important factor in a good looking image if there's obviously a person there. If you look at old film stocks, Kodak stocks, one of the main points of that stock tends to say natural looking skin tone. So it's, with digital, same thing. It's how our flesh tones are rendered. And that's what people look at. And if a skin tone looks green, doesn't look right, it really stands out and can kind of ruin the image, even if overall it's kind of an interesting look. So skin tones are very important. So I think it's going to be nice to spend some class time on skin tones. I have some nice examples here. We have a couple green screen shots that really highlight the skin tones in these shots. I'll kind of discuss some tricks with coloring skin tone on green screen, but also just kind of zero in on just the skin tones. I also have this Effects PhD short film clip here, and I'll play with kind of pushing a look and discuss when to try to bring some natural skin tone in a surrounding of a pushed color correction versus letting that skin tone kind of be a part of that environment where you just let it kind of go a little desaturated or let it go cool. So there were some questions in the forum about that, so I think it might be kind of fun to play with that. And then I also have this awesome clip here of this guy turning into a zombie. So the trick here, I think in the original intent of this shot was as this guy falls over, he kind of becomes a zombie. So we'll kind of play with grabbing the skin tone and then sucking some color out of it to kind of help that transition of becoming a zombie. That was probably done in visual effects, but we can do some stuff in color that could be kind of fun. So that is another example. So first off, very importantly, I'd like to discuss when you're grabbing a secondary, where your reference for that secondary is coming from, especially when you're grabbing skin tone. So this particular shot wasn't natively log, but I converted it to log just as an example for you guys. So I'll first convert it to linear with my tech grade here. So we'll do something like, so log to linear, and I'll just give it a little more contrast. So the concept I kind of want to talk about is if your skin tone correction or isolation is referencing this log image, super flat, kind of gray and desaturated, it's going to be tricky to actually zero in on that skin tone cleanly. So if that's your reference for your skin tone, there's going to be more separation in color. So in whatever system you're using, make sure you know how to point your correction to the appropriate layer. So in Baselight, for example, I'll take my D key and I'll just swipe across his skin and show you what it grabs. So you can see it grabbed some of the browner green grass, it grabbed the white fence, which is more brown, and it grabbed some greens, and not the best isolation. So I'll delete that, start a new layer, but this time in my GUI you can see I have different options to, it'd be nice in Baselight if I can pick any layer, but it doesn't allow me that. And so, but luckily I only need to point it to layer 1. So I'll select layer 1 and I'll go back to and you can see right off the bat, just by swiping it, it has much tighter control, it didn't pick up as much of the grass, and that's only because I'm referencing layer 1, which has more contrast and color. So it's still picking up other stuff, but it's not quite as tricky to grab onto. So that's just something to watch out for, and it's not going to solve all your problems, but it's something to know, and it really helps out a lot. So cool. So I think, so first off, I'm going to color the lovely lady here and talk a little bit about coloring people skin tone on green screen and some tricks with that, especially with green. There doesn't seem to be a lot of bounce on this footage, but a lot of green screen I see, there's quite a bit of bounce, so there's a lot more green. She actually does have quite a bit of green in her face, and I'll balance that out. But so first off, I'll take my layer 1, and again, I'm just going to be dialing in overall corrections of this stuff, but try to focus the discussion on the skin tones. So just bringing in some contrast, gain, lift, playing with the mids a little bit, and this will just be my base, so that'll be my starting point. And next what I'll do is actually comp just a white, because a lot of times this stuff ends up with a white background, and what you'll find is you'll color and it looks great on the green screen, but once that background gets comped, it looks awful. So it's nice right off the bat to actually do the composite yourself here. And in Baselight, it's just a really kind of a down and dirty kind of composite, but it at least gets you a reference for what actually goes back there. And you know, if it's not white, if it's just something that has more mid-tone in it, you can always just tone it down, or you know, a lot of times it's 100% white, so I'll just leave it at that, assuming that's what was going to go back there. And it really affects the way you color correct. If it's down here, she feels a little bit overexposed, if that's what kind of the composited background is going to feel like. But if it's up here, she feels maybe a little bit down, so you may want to push her highlights up. So it's very important to actually comp something similar into what's actually going to go back there, because it's definitely going to, if you have a frame, a JPEG or something of what is going to go back there, that's obviously the best situation. So the first thing with skin tone is never, you know, color the overall to look nice. Don't necessarily try to color the whole scene to make the skin tone look nice, because that's going to throw everything else off. Try to do your primary grade as an overall, and then see where the skin tones go. So in general, I'm just going to pull a little warmth out of the mids. The blacks feel pretty balanced, and the whites, there's not really a great reference for white, so I'm going to not touch the whites too much. I'm just going to pull a little green yellow out of the whites, but mostly take some warmth out of the mids. And you can see that gets a little of that yellowy green out of her skin tone, but not exactly what I really want. And so I'll kind of keep that there. Pull a little saturation down, but she still feels a little green, so I'm going to put my skin tone correction next. And first thing I'm going to do is going to point my reference to layer 1, which has some more contrast and more color, and it'll get me a better isolation. And the trick here is this you'll notice quite a bit if you ever see a color correction and they look like they just they hadn't slept in days, and their eyes look really red. And sometimes that's if somebody color corrected it, grabbed the skin tone, and actually left the isolation on the whites of the eye. So be careful when you're pulling an isolation to, if you can, to try to avoid the whites of the eye, because what's going to happen is as you add some warmth or whatever you do is going to offset the white of her eyes, and she's going to look sickly. So just watch that. So you can see these highlights on the side are similar to the whites of her eyes. So what I'm going to do is just kind of leave those off for now and just kind of see where it goes. But so then here's my isolation there, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of a blur on there. Kind of soften that up. And if you soften it up too much, then you'll see a bleed into other areas of the blacks. So just be careful you don't put too much blur on there. It's actually pretty easy to do. So my first thing I'm going to do is just pull a little green yellow out of her face there. Typically I don't go to the gain, to the whites, and offset that, but it seems like there's quite a bit of yellow green in the highlights, so I'm actually going to go to the gain and kind of pull a little bit of green out of there. And if I A/B it there, you'll see off the bat how much green was really in her face. And it's looking okay, but now it feels a little red. And that's the struggle with skin tones. And I don't know exactly what her skin tone looks like, but green tends to never look good in anybody's skin tone. But again, I'm just kind of working the mids and the gain. Sometimes you'll see the color of the shadows of her skin tone is definitely different than the mids, and then these high highlights. So I kind of work them all. A lot of times I just like to stay with the gamma, with the midtones. That usually works. A kind of a beauty shot like this tends to have more dynamics to it. There's more highlights and shadows, so you kind of have to work them all. Typically just using the gamma will work. And I'll just pull a little saturation out, because as I'm pushing around the RGB, lift gamma gain, sometimes it can feel like it's getting a little more saturated, so kind of work that back down. Another trick is I've actually, this has happened to me quite a bit, where again I grab her skin tone and their lips are left out of the correction, and then I color the skin tone to look nice, and I play through it, and then it looks like they're about to faint because their lips are blue. So make sure their lips get that color correction as well, because I don't know if I can demo it here. Her lips will just look green probably, but yeah, can't really tell. But a lot of times if their skin tones are kind of pale looking and you don't include the lips, they can look, they can again look sickly. So that's looking okay. So now I'll pull off that white composite, and you can see how much different it really looks with and without. So that's really going to kind of dictate kind of where you go with it. So this is shot pretty well. Sometimes in a shot like this, the client will ask to whiten the teeth, but her teeth look pretty white. Sometimes with skin tones, and it's just a portrait like this, you'll want to not just only to color the skin tone, but to go after the eyes. Maybe you want to soften some bags under the eyes, or she has nice skin, so there's not a lot to soften. But if you wanted to go a little bit more fashion with her, we could throw a little Baselight's little skin filter is just called Soften, very creatively called Soften. And again, it's nicer than a blur, because the blur just looks like a blur, where the Soften just gives a nice smooth kind of creamy texture to the skin. And some clients are hit or miss on it. Some love the kind of fashiony look to it, and some just go, it just looks blurred. And it's like, okay, it's but it's something to definitely kind of show off to the client and just kind of see if they like it or not. So again, you'll see this is the before, so you can see how green she was, and now we're much cleaner. And you could go in there, and again, her eyes are pretty wide. I can kind of show you something I worked on before the recording the class here, and it's not quite as I did a much better job live recording the class than I did earlier, so let me add a little more contrast back in there. But in this example, I actually isolated her eyes, and again, that's sometimes part of making the beauty of the image is to, she had some red in her eye. She probably might have brown eyes, obviously, but let's make them green for fun. So that's something a lot of times the clients will look at and want. And so just color correctors are nice. They can do that these days. So Cool. So what I think I'll do is I'll actually just kind of build that from scratch and kind of show you how I did it there, coloring the eyes, because that's kind of a fun thing. So what I do is just go in there and isolate the eye, a nice quick track, and the thing that can really throw this little trick off is if she blinks, but luckily she does not. So I'll go down to my key, my D key, and grab the eye, and then just with a little bit of gamma, I'll just put a little green in there, just brighten it up a little bit. Go a little hazel with it. And do her other eye. A lot of times this is more of a VFX finish kind of thing, so a lot of times clients kind of get a kick out of it if you pull it off. You know, as long as you can do it quickly. If it takes an hour, then it's really not worth it at all. So again, the track's usually pretty good, and the key's pretty well, so you can go crazy with it. Or look like a Terminator lady there, but you know, it's a pretty clean isolation. So again, you can have fun with that, but again, that's all part of the beauty of it. You know, there's plenty of spots on TV right now, fashion spots, that you can just tell they cranked on the blue or something. It just looks pretty silly, but it can look really nice if done tastefully. So cool. So this is where we finished with this lovely lady here, and you know, turned out to look nice. So again, it's just a process, and just trying to decide whether it's a yellow skin, is it green skin, and how do I pull that out and just make it look natural. That's all that skin tones are about, is just making it look natural. So for him, I'll just kind of do the same thing I did on her, but he has different skin tone characteristics, so we'll see where he ends up. So I'll just copy my composite on him. Base layer, just give it a little contrast. So what I'm seeing in him is he's got a little red in him, so let's pull out my keyer, point it to layer 1. And it's usually the pointing to layer 1, the more contrasty after the LUT works better with log footage, when again, this isn't really log, so this isn't, if you guys are playing around with this footage, it won't be as noticeable as if it was natively log. And you can see here, grabbing his skin tone is going to grab his teeth a little bit, so whatever we do to the skin tone may end up affecting the teeth. So again, that's something to watch for. The worst thing you can do is make the skin tone look better, but then make something else look way worse and not really getting anywhere. So with the last example, I did more of a lift gamma gain differential balance kind of tweak to the skin tones. This one I'll try to do something a little differently. In Baselight's world, it's called hue shift, which is a HSL 6 vector tool. And so what I'll do is here is, since I'm noticing a little bit of yellow green up in some of these highlights in him, in some red patches and other, what you can kind of do is take the yellow and swing it away from green. As you can see, now he looks really bad suntan, and just pull a little bit of green out of the yellow, and then take the red and swing it away from magenta, just to pull in. Just again, a little dab will do you. So you're basically just pulling a little green out of the yellow and a little magenta out of the red. And so I can just show you on the Baselight scopes here as an example of what's going on. So it's subtle, but you can see how that trace on the vector scope's getting squished together a little bit. I'll accentuate it a little bit just to show you here. So it's kind of originally like that, and it's kind of squeezing. Again, it's pulling the green out and the magenta out, and that's too much, but it's just to kind of show you on the vector scope there what's going on. And then if I desaturate from there, you can kind of see his skin tone getting, actually, again, just by desaturating, the kind of pushed hue shift tool little trick, it actually can actually have some nice results. And that's another trick to do with skin tone, if opposed to using lift, gamma, gain, balance. So, because the thing with flesh tones that I notice the most that start to get off base is when you're using, it seems to be when even myself, when I'm using gain, you know, when that gets pushed around, it's almost like you're putting a wash of color on top, and it just looks kind of, starts to get nasty. So just be, you know, I would play around with it, push it, and kind of see where it goes and what looks bad and what looks good. But that is another little trick on this guy here. So let me jump to another example. I'll go to our zombie apocalypse zombie hunter kid here from the Effects PhD short film. And I think on this one, it'd be kind of fun to go more extreme with the look and do like kind of a skip bleach type look and see where the skin tones go and kind of discuss what to do with them there. So I think, so on this one, as far as the base, I think we're actually in a pretty good spot. This footage came in as linear, kind of what you see is what you get. So I'll color it from here. So again, I'll just kind of do a quick little and I did work on this beforehand, but I think it's important to kind of start from scratch with you guys and kind of see how it goes from the start, because I think that's important here. So, you know, kind of crunch it down a little bit, desat, cool it off, give it that, push the whites up. I'm using my output layer to do a little soft clip on the highlights there. Kind of go back to my primary layer and just kind of, again, desat and cool off a little bit. And just to give it a little more interest, let's kind of do something with the grass, a little more fun here. Kind of pulling a little yellow out of the grass just to kind of go with that palette of cooler tones. A little Kentucky bluegrass for you here, and then that purple shirt's kind of bothering me a bit, so let's just kind of swing that around and then just kind of desaturate the jeans and the sweatshirt a little bit. So I'm kind of working lift, gamma, gain, just kind of cooling it off. It's put a little vignette up in the sky. Cool. So let's see where we're at. So that's a little more interesting there. Let's open up the mids a little bit more. It's getting a little on the muddy side. So, you know, you look at kind of where the skin tones are at now, and they're actually pretty good. I mean, that's the thing with color correction. It's like if know when to say when, so to speak. It's like if they look good, they look good, you know. But I think he looks a little. If we want to kind of give him more life, the zombies are the more cold, gray, dead skin. Maybe he looks too zombie-ish for the director, and he wants to give him a little bit more life. So I think the objective here is going to be let's give him a little more warmth. Let's liven him up a little bit because we don't want the audience to think that he's a zombie here. So here again, original to where we're at, and I kind of already know that I'm going to have to do a track on his skin tone. So let's first see what we're up against and pull a key on his skin, and I'm definitely going to have to isolate him here. So and sometimes it's tricky. Do I want to grab his hair? Do I not? I'm not going to grab his hair here, so I'm going to just kind of stop it there. Sometimes it actually looks good when that skin tone correction goes into the hair, but if you're really pushing a lot of color and warmth into the skin tone, then the hair will look kind of odd. So again, be careful of what's being isolated and what's not. I'm going to use Baselight's motion tracker here. And for the most part, it works pretty well, but I'm sure by the end, actually I'm lying because I actually know by the end of that track it falls off. So what I'll do is I'll kind of augment the auto track with some keyframes to kind of keep it centered on the kid there. And I already can tell that once we play with his skin tone, his hands, and that's another kind of fun thing to look for. Sometimes if you see skin tone corrections in commercials or movies and the skin tone, you can tell looks like it's been affected, and you see their hands and they're totally different. You can definitely, that's kind of a little sign that it has been affected. But I'm just slowly what's nice is with Baselight, I'm just using keyframes to affect the XY axis of this shape. And but you can keyframe any attribute for the shape, and what's nice is I can actually keep because a lot of times as I'm adjusting this track, I adjust the feather of the shape, and if you have the feather keyframed, that can look really bad if the feather constantly is like changing. So I usually change the keyframing on the feathering of the shape to a constant, so it doesn't give it away. And so here's a classic example of a secondary falling apart when it hits the mist. So because it's changing the contrast and the density of his skin. So you can see right here it comes up. So I'll just kind of again swipe the skin there and keep that in there. And so I'm gonna what I like to do once I kind of have all the main keyframes set, opposed to just randomly finding spots to offset the keyframe, I'll definitely want to just jump to those keyframes that are already there and adjust, because if you just randomly adjust it where it goes off, then you're going to have a million keyframes and it's going to be hard to keep on top of. So try to keep them at a minimum. Again, we're not doing any heavy compositing here, so it doesn't have to be like completely perfectly rotoed or anything. So we'll name the layer there because I'm not smart enough to remember what layer does what. So again he looks pretty gray, ashy, and let's just use some gamma. He's pretty even, pretty flatly graded as I did to open up the mid. So I'm just going to use the gamma to warm him up. You can kind of A/B it there and just kind of see how that plays. Feels like to me a little much, but maybe that's okay. Ooh. It's actually not awful. So So yeah, again, just a little gamma, a little warmth. You can see how easy it goes pink and it goes green. So it's really very, you got to kind of find that sweet spot where he doesn't look too red, doesn't look too green, somewhere in the middle there, and just kind of ride the saturation as well. You know, sometimes you can get a little bit over chromatized there. So let's watch that. So I think if I wanted to get nuts, I would probably track each one of his hands and include that into the correction. And let's get nuts real quick here, see how easy that'd be. It's falling off at the end there. So, but if any of you guys get excited, you can go ahead and do the hands. But you can see how just on this still, by including his hands really sells the believability of that skin tone. And he might be just a scotch red. And so here's our original there. So you can see how this, we have a little more, not super extreme, but we have kind of a skip bleachy kind of a look, kind of a fantasy. It's kind of desaturated and cool, and you know that you can see where his skin tones. You could actually get by with leaving him as is, but again, thinking the director may want a little more life in him, you can get away with it. So cool. That's a pretty fun shot. So hope you guys have fun with that one. Cool. So lastly, we're going to take a look at this vomiting man turning into a zombie and try to emulate the little effect that was intended for this shot. As far as him, you know, as he's morphing into this zombie, you know, you subtly feel the life or the blood getting sucked out of him, and he gets a little more ashy gray, zombie-ish, whether we go bluish or greenish with it. But we'll do a kind of a in correction, you know, transition as we kind of keyframe the correction to a different color for his skin. So I'll start off by my base correction, give this shot a little contrast. Let's just kind of pretend that this shot and this shot kind of cut next to each other. So we're going to want to keep the tone and the color kind of in that world. So just to give us something to kind of match to. And just a quick thing about that, depending on your setup, it's great to have, in Baselight I have what's called a cut view, and that's my little timeline with little frames, and I can use that to choose a poster frame of each shot and just quickly view it and to kind of match shots. And I also have a frame store, still store on another dual display that you guys can't see that I can save off frames to. So that's a great, you know, we take it for granted as colorists, but sometimes it can be a tricky thing. So any way to have a still store, frame store as a reference is, it's the best way to match shots. So again, we're way warmer. He's really red, so we're going to want to in my look layer here, use gamma to pull out some warmth. So I'm also using a little bit of gain to pull a little warmth out as well, because I was seeing if I zero out that differential, you can see how pink and red his skin tone was. So I'll pull a little bit out there. And again, it's I've said it before, but always start with your primaries. You know, never jump to your secondaries before you kind of get the overall vibe, overall look dialed in with a primary, because you don't want to kind of chase your tail a little bit. If you jump to your secondary too quickly, it can really slow you down. So and as you can see, as we kind of cool it off and go a little denser with it, whatnot, his skin tone starts to go into that kind of, he starts to get paler looking. So what we're going to do is warm him up probably in this kind of world here, and as I go in back of this guy and fix him, we'll try to get their skin tones somewhere in the same world as the normal human look, and then we can cross dissolve to this or push that a little further. So I'm going to reference layer 1, select his skin tone, and I'm going to guess it's going to pick up some of the grass, but that's going to be okay if it's just a subtle amount, because I'm not gonna cut him out. That's quite a bit of work there. So I'm gonna put a little blur on that matte, and let's see where we go with bring him back to life a little bit there. And again, that's just using gamma, again, to bring some warmth back to him. So we'll see how that isolation tracks. And it's falling off at the beginning of the shot, so we'll pull a little bit back there. And again, I don't get too crazy. You know, you do your best to try to omit some of these areas that aren't skin tone, but as long as it still looks natural, you're probably okay. It depends again on time and whatnot. If you want to garbage that out with another matte, you can do that. But we'll kind of see once the shot gets along here. When he pukes up. Very nice. Let's see. Again, what's going to sell these shots the same as that grass. So the grass here is a little more saturated, so I'm just going to go in there and desaturate that green a little bit without touching him. Just a little bit. It's just a 20% or so desat on the grass, and that gets fairly close. So now all I'm going to do is, you know, what you want to do is pick your key in and key out. Does he start transforming right when you see the first sign of puke, or is it a little bit before? That's the fun part, so you can just help tell his story. So let's, I think if it's too quick, it's going to look cheesy and it's going to look too fake. So it's probably going to need to be more subtle. And then in Baselight, what I want to do is select, you can tell it to, if I'm past, like right now I'm parked on the keyframe, which is at the end of the dissolve, and I can put a selection here so you can see this keyframe is highlighted. So now anytime I'm past that keyframe, any adjustment I make, it will affect that keyframe. So it doesn't add another keyframe. So just, again, keep that in mind, is to minimize your keyframes that can kind of go haywire. So I'm just going to pull the warmth back out of them here. Desaturate them. And let's just go for it to see how it looks. Just play through it. It's kind of fun. It's subtle, but it works. Do I see any artifacting in the grass or in his little man purse fanny pack he's got going on there? Not sure, but what I do notice is that my correction is grabbing his wound there, which I think, again, that would be a storytelling kind of question for the director. Do you want that effect to affect the wound? Do you want that not to? That would probably, I did play with it a little bit prior to the class, and it'd take a little while to kind of play with that, but that would be something you garbage mask that out. I'd probably be more of a visual effect type thing because it gets a little tricky, but if you guys want to play with that on your own, you're more than welcome to. Cool, so I think that pretty much covers it for this shot. I think it actually turned out looking pretty cool. I mean, it's very natural and doesn't look too effecty looking, and I think it helps tell the story there. So I think something like this would, as a colorist, would you pull this effect off? Would the VFX artist pull this off? I think this really comes down to workflow, budget, confidence in being able to pull it off naturally as possible as a colorist, and you know, obviously budget. But like if it's a lower budget indie film, usually the client will probably try to push me to do it, and you can see it actually didn't take that long to pull it off. And most, you know, it's literally a pretty simple, you know, isolation on his skin. I didn't do anything fancy, and I just have one keyframe at the beginning, one at the end. So this, I'm guessing most color correction systems could pull this off that have the ability to key colors and to keyframe that correction. So, but as far as the dynamic of does the colorist do it, I think there was a question on the forum about the lines blurring, and it's really true. You know, I use an EDL to conform these shots in my timeline. Essentially, I have editing tools. I kind of do some kind of visual effects and obviously color correction. So again, that's just a workflow thing, and asking, you know, does the client want you to do it or not? If you feel like you can pull it off quickly and effectively, go ahead and do it. And it can only impress the client to your abilities. So, but if it's riding the line of kind of cheesy, doesn't look good, you know, it can look better, and there's a budget to do it down the line, then by all means, let that happen downstream of you. So great, that concludes Class 7. In Class 8, we're going to focus on skin tone a little bit more with some footage from moving day. Also check in Class 7's downloads section for footage for the next challenge. There'll be an EDL along with the media. And in the forum, keep an eye on the forums for the due date for the next challenge. And the footage is from a television show called Red Dwarf. And for this challenge, I'd like you just to do whatever you'd like creatively, have fun with it, give it a look, you know, apply what you've learned in the previous classes. But what I'd also like to add to it is maybe include a text file with your submission, and I want you to sell the look to me. So pretend that I'm your client, and then the look that you come up with is going to help tell the story, and the look that you feel passionately about, and you have a point of view of why you want that way, and I want you to kind of sell it to me and just kind of describe why you did that, because that's really important. Because with clients, I can come up with the coolest, edgiest, you know, look that I've ever done, but if I can't sell it to my client, then it's just going to go nowhere. So that's a huge part of when you're going a little bit beyond the normal color correction, is really selling it to your client. So sometimes that can be a challenge, and I think it'll be something fun for this challenge. So again, thanks for listening and watching, and we'll keep posting the forums, and we'll see you in Class 8. Thanks, guys.